likes. I mean, he poo-poos everything.
Gary, hold on 1 second. Hold
sure,
on. Let me cut you off 1 second. I had an issue with the recording, and for YouTube, when this uploads later, I want to make sure that I get your program on there. So I'm just going to do, this is really cheesy, but I'm going to do your intro again. You were telling us, so here we go again. Guys, let me kick it over to Gary Hendershot. He is the founder of the Smart Scarecrow Show every Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Justin TV. Gary Hendershot, please welcome to Wide Awake News Radio, and thank you very much for co-hosting with me on these Mondays so we can talk alternative energy and the such.
Hey, it's always my pleasure, Charlie. You know, I guess I should let you know, my recordings never fail. I could always send you an MP3.
Oh, well, that would have saved that would have saved everybody having to hear me do that again, I guess. But you know what, though? When I record them here, and this has happened with you and I before, where a week will go by before I finally get to it. If I have the recording here, then as soon as the program's over, I can just go ahead and upload them right away, and you don't have to wait for 4 or 5 days for me to get this posted.
I understand, and you know, sometimes you know, I'm a little slow getting the recording up too, so it's, you know, it goes both ways. In any case, let me start out. Let me start out again. I do a show every Thursday on Justin TV. It's an audio video presentation, and one of my favorite guests, I have this guy on.
Bragger, you got the good equipment. That's what you're saying, because I'm doing audio only.
I have the best toys here, I got to tell you. But in any case, one of my favorite guests is a fellow by the name of Mark Dancy, who's out of Australia. And this guy is a skeptic. He hates everything. You know, I mean, everybody's excited about this alternative energy project. He'll come in and just absolutely, you know, throw cold water on it and say, I don't like it. But, you know, one of the interviews I had with him a couple weeks ago highlighted the difference of what government can do to either aid a technological innovation or hinder it. And we got off on this discussion of, you know, everybody's pretty familiar with solar. Now, there is a low-tech solar technology referred to as thermal solar, where basically all you're trying to do is you're trying to collect some heat off the sun. And some people use this to heat water. I've even seen forced air systems where they force air through a heat exchanger, and people have used these things to heat their homes, to heat hot water in the home. There are a number of good uses for this technology. It's a fairly simple technology.
It's just like a passive solar.
I've seen people implement these things out of, you know, some glass that they salvaged out of a construction site and beer cans. Quite literally, I have seen people drill holes in a piece of plywood, put beer cans in the holes, paint the beer cans black, and then cover it with a glass enclosure.
Sure.
And collect heat. I mean, these are very simple gadgets that people can put together themselves that are actually
and they'll run them on the roof. They'll run them on the roof. They'll have water piping through it.
Sure.
You know, and you can get your water to near boiling temperature.
Yeah, the things are really very effective. Well, you know, now everybody's also familiar with this photovoltaic. Now, this is a fairly expensive technology.
No, let me ask you this too, because
sure.
To me it seems like I'm here in Montana. Now I'm in southwest Montana. We don't have a ton of wind turbines here. You know, maybe 40 miles away, I think, is our closest where I could go look at some big wind turbines or big windmills going on. But about 150 miles away, up in the Judith Gap region, it's called, there's hundreds and hundreds. There's a big wind farm out there. And Gary, it is, I mean, so I'm looking at these massive General Electric turbines. You know, these things are 300 feet up in the air. And you know, it takes 5 semis to get one of them down the road. Then once you get it set up, you need these massive cranes to set these big, what are they called, nacelles, I think, that are on the top of these towers. All kinds of expense in the setup. And then once it's up and running, you have moving parts nonstop, 24/7, and you know, adjustable variable pitch rotors, that kind of deal. Just
those things are very complex and very difficult to maintain.
A lot of moving parts, a lot of maintenance, and it seems to me that solar, you're talking about a solar panel that converts sunlight directly into energy. Even if it's expensive, that just makes so much more sense. No moving parts. So why is wind so prevalent?
Well, mainly because, and this gets back to the core of my argument, our government gave huge tax incentives to General Electric and some other vendors to get these big wind farms set up. Now, the problem with the big wind farms is they create the energy out in the middle of nowhere where they can, negotiate to get the amount of land required to set these things up on the cheap. Now they've got this energy way out in the middle of nowhere where, the only beneficiaries of the electric that they can generate might be some cows and chickens. They really need to get that electricity down into the cities where they need it. And what they find is that the amount of energy that they lose in the transmission lines, moving it from where it's created to where it's actually needed, is significant. So you heap that on the cost. But General Electric got fantastic multi-year tax breaks for putting those things up there. What's really frustrating is when you drive through some parts of the nation and you see these big wind farms out there,
right,
and every other turbine is not spinning.
That's right. That's right. They're down for maintenance. They're down for maintenance all the time.
That's when it really gets frustrating, when it really burns your fanny. Now what they do differently in Australia, and this gets back to my lead, where I was talking about this guy Mark Dancy, who was telling me about what they did in Australia. What they did in Australia to promote the implementation of alternative energy technologies is they didn't go to General Electric or General Dynamics or any of the other big generals, They went right down to the buck private and they said, hey, Mr. Homeowner, if you put an alternative energy device of some sort, and, they had their list of approved types that they would accept. One of the types they thought was cool was the passive solar, where you heat your water with it. They thought that was cool. They would have accepted a passive hot air system, similar to what a lot of people here in the United States build out of beer cans and plywood. They were all gung ho for photovoltaic. If you want to go the photovoltaic route, they said that's great too. But they gave the tax incentives directly to the individual. They said, hey, look, whatever you spend on your alternative energy implementation, you can deduct off your taxes on a schedule over 5 years.
Right.
And it was just amazing how the Australians jumped on the bandwagon. They said, okay, I got to pay this money out in taxes anyway. If instead of giving it to the government, I give it to this guy over here, this local vendor of mine who'll come put in a solar implementation for me, I get to, that reduces my tax burden. And it was a 1-for-1 relationship initially. When they first did this program, every dollar you spent on a solar project, you got to take off your taxes. So this was a great deal for the consumer. It got the consumer calling up the local small businessman in his community saying, hey, get me on the list. Come on out here and install one of these bad boys. Man, I want one now. And so small business got a real shot in the arm. But, here in the United States, instead of doing a program like that, where you have a pull-through type scenario where you go right to the consumer and say, hey, look, our national agenda is that we get, 10% of our home heating or 10% of our hot water or 10% of whatever, we want to make a significant impact in our use of traditional fuels or go alternatives. We will go directly to the consumer and say, hey, the break is for you. No, here in the United States, we go to one of the generals and we say, hey, if you jam this stuff down people's throats, we'll give you the breaks. And, the real benefit rarely, if ever, gets down to Joe Consumer. So the really cool thing that Australia did is they took a totally different approach to it. They pulled the product through the supply chain instead of jam it down people's throat, and their program worked. They got excellent penetration on alternative energy in Australia.
Well, I'm a firm believer that the government has a place. There's people who think the government has, there's a lot of people who listen to this program that think that there is no place for government. we have Molyneux come on here, and he's a complete and total anarchist. He wants an anarchist system. But government does have a place, and this kind of technology, I think, really does require to keep special interest out of it, because what you end up with is what do we have now, Gary? We have 40, 50-year-old nuclear reactors that have never made a dime, never will. They're subsidized from the word go. Now they're falling apart, and we have the same the bread and butter energy is the same thing we've been using for 100 years.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse. Our infrastructure here in the United States is aged and in really bad shape. It's going to catch up to us eventually. I mean, we've got about 26 Fukushimas just waiting to happen. So it'll get us eventually. And when it happens, they'll claim, oh, it's a big surprise. We had no forewarning. We have no idea how, this thing could possibly, popped its cork. Yeah, right. But it is really, the fault of the government because of the way they work,
because they're so damn corrupt.
Exactly. Now, in an ideal world, frankly, I would agree with the anarchist position. In an ideal world, I would love to have a government who, frankly, just left me alone and stayed out of my way. But that is not the reality. We have a government that insists on putting its nose into our business, whether we like it or not. If we accept that as a reality of life, let them at least be somewhat more benign than what we've seen. I mean, what we get here in the United States is situations like the Solyndra affair, where a bunch of big shots donate a lot of money to Obama. Obama gets out there for a photo op and says, hey, Solyndra is the up-and-coming alternative energy, this and that and the other thing, really pats them on the back. As soon as the photo op is over, they move their manufacturing to China.
Yeah.
Now, that's the kind of government support for alternative energy projects we get here in the United States. The big shots get the kiss on the cheek, and, we get kicked in the whatever.
Well, Gary, I mean, it's real simple. I mean, you don't have to be an alternative energy or an energy expert at all to understand what's going on. I mean, it's who is greasing the wheels in D.C. This is what happens when you have a legal-based capitalist system, and it has nothing to do with the benefit. Our representative government, it's representative in name only as far as the people of this country are concerned. They represent the people who can fund them through their next election cycle. I mean,
one of the other arguments I hear from skeptics all the time. Now, keep in mind, there are some good, solid alternative energy technologies out there that could be game changers. I mean, they could really change the way average Joe pulls power off the wall. I mean, the wall outlet doesn't change. The cord you plug into the wall doesn't change. But the way that juice gets created could be done in a totally different way than the ways we're doing it right now, if it was allowed. But there are people out there who know whose palms to grease that have a vested interest in sucking every drop of oil, every bit of natural gas possible out of the earth, and using that technology until it is absolutely exhausted. They have this vested interest, and they're going to do it that way, and as long as they're greasing the correct politicians' palms, they're going to have it that way.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever. Again, look at the technology that's being brought to bear. Inefficient, dangerous nuclear technology. I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me why wind turbines are a better alternative than solar. I mean, I don't understand. And I think Eric tried at one point. Is the technology better for wind? I mean, is wind more reliable? Is wind great? Can you transfer more energy from wind?
I like small scale wind. Keep in mind, if you were a farmer out in the middle of nowhere and you needed to pump water out of the ground to feed your animals, You drilled a well and you powered it with a windmill.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, they were doing this 200 years ago. This is old technology. And done on a small scale like that, where an individual might put up one or two windmills on their property, use that to charge batteries. The nice thing about wind is in areas where they have a nice steady wind, it runs 24 hours a day. You can draw energy off these things 24 hours a day. Even the best solar is not going to give you any electricity when the sun goes down. So there is the argument in some parts of the country that wind is a somewhat more effective alternative energy producer. When you go into solar, if you want to have some lights on or play with your computer or something like that after dark, you've got to use your solar to charge up a huge battery bank that costs a bloody fortune. And then you got to have inverters to convert it from the voltage that the batteries store to whatever your gizmos use. So you start getting into some pretty expensive technologies to use solar as a primary source of energy. I mean, as an emergency backup, I use solar as an emergency backup. I've got a couple little panels. If my electricity goes out, I can charge up my iPad or something using solar. But,
what about what about heating water with solar? I mean, I've seen what is it in Dubai? They're making the model city where they're using technology of heating water with the sun, and this is creating steam and driving a turbine. You know, the same technology that the hydroelectric dams use, driving a turbine.
You got the same problem. What do you do when the sun goes down? You know, now, I have seen systems proposed where they use heat from the sun, focused using parabolic mirrors, to heat a metallic salt to a liquid. This stuff, at room temperature, this stuff is a solid. But if you heat it up just a little bit, maybe a couple of 100 degrees, it turns into a semi-viscous liquid. You then store that liquid, and using a heat exchanger, you can use that to heat water overnight, say. Mm-hmm. So, I have seen systems proposed like that, but you tend to get into some fairly complex technology. But generally speaking, for average Joe, if you were thinking about something to use as a home installation, as kind of something that a prepper might look at, something right, that average Joe Blow individual might set up to take care of their personal needs, the simpler the system, the better. And I think right now, small scale wind works. Small scale solar, where maybe you got a couple of 200 watt panels charging a couple of 12 volt batteries, and use that to run 12 volt appliances. That works. Solar thermal, where you use it to heat up the water that you might wash the dishes, wash the clothes, or take a bath in. That works. Where we get into problems is when you start to make the system resemble what we've had with the grid, where, boy, I just go in and I flip my switch and the lights come on.
Right.
That is a luxury that is going to be difficult to provide unless you go to a fairly complex, fairly expensive system.
All right, hang tight. I want to talk to you a little bit about communities coming together, like these electrical co-ops coming together to do something to alleviate some of the too big industry that is greasing the wheels of Washington in order to get their special interest served. We're going to be back with Gary of the Smart Scarecrow Show and more Wide Awake News Radio in 5.5 minutes. Hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. Gary Hindershot of the Smart Scarecrow program is our co-host tonight, every Monday. We're going to do the Alternative Energy Hour, and then whatever it develops into, which we were talking off air during the break, and we could certainly go down roads that had nothing to do with energy. So, but let's keep it on energy for a minute. But he did mention to me.
Yeah, I do have a couple of quick things I wanted to get out there that are related.
Let me do this first, Gary. Let me
go ahead.
Put the invitation out. If somebody wants to call in and talk to Gary or myself, please feel free to do so. 877-342-6673. I'm monitoring the board, so if you call in, I won't leave you hanging like I did to some poor guy last week. And I also wanted to announce for those of you who tuned in Friday, and we're trying to figure out what happened to the programming. The producer had a family emergency. It was kind of a big deal. It was a big, scary deal is what it was. I'm assuming everything is okay with Brett because he's back at work today, so I'm happy for that. But that's the reason we ended up with running a rebroadcast on Friday. Again, 877-342-6673. That is the call-in number. If you want to get a question in or comment for myself or Gary, call in now. This is our last half hour with Gary. Gary, you had something else you wanted to cover?
Yeah, one of the things I hear from the skeptical types, and believe it or not, there are skeptics who don't believe that anything could possibly produce energy other than petroleum products or natural gas or whatever. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. But one of the things I hear from these guys is, okay, if you came up with a left-handed knibbler joint that could magically produce all sorts of energy on the cheap.
A knibbler joint?
Left-handed knibbler joint. You've heard of those, haven't you?
Sure. I have a right-handed knibbler right now.
You can get one at every hardware store. These left-handed knibbler joints, they're very popular. But, if you had one of these things that could produce radical amounts of energy from the cheap, some big company would just come, dump huge amounts of money at your feet, and that thing would be on the end cap at Walmart any day. That's the argument that the skeptics come out with. When in reality, what we find out is that, yes, many technologies have come to the forefront that look very, very promising, and a big company like an Exxon or a General Motors or whatever came in, bought up that technology, and scuttled it to protect their investment in the current technology. So in reality, what happens is that the vested interests tend to keep these technologies from competing with them. That is the reality. So that particular argument just really doesn't, that dog don't hunt. We do have an alternative energy product that's very, very close to market that's manufactured in, guess where? Greece.
China. Oh.
No. There's an outfit called Defcalion in Greece. Now, this is a small 30-man shop that's come up with a very practical, small-scale. I guess the popular way that this technology would be known is it is a cold fusion device. It's been proven to work. It's very effective. And these guys are ready to go into manufacture, okay? They are ready to manufacture. The thing is proven. It's been signed off on. Numerous university studies have said, yeah, this darn thing works. Gosh darn. They can't get anybody in Greece to take a risk and invest in it. So mainly because, of course, the Greek economy is in a tailspin and everybody's afraid to invest in a company that's centered in Greece. So they're looking at it now like, okay, well, the only way we're going to be able to get our technology into the marketplace is if we move. They're talking about moving out of Greece and potentially moving into. They're talking about Toronto or maybe Australia.
What is this? What is this technology? What is it?
Can an economy or a government have an impact on the deployment of an alternative energy technology? You betcha.
Okay, wait a minute. What is this technology you're talking about in this company out of Greece? What is it?
The technology is based on a process that most people would know as cold fusion. Nowadays, we tend to refer to it as a low-energy nuclear reaction. Basically, what it is, it's a nuclear reaction that takes place at just a few hundred degrees as opposed to the zillions of degrees that they're talking about, the surface of the sun, the big fusion type reactors they've been working on for 40 years and never been able to generate an ounce of energy out of. These things actually are producing energy. The technology's not great. It's kind of in its infancy right now. The way I liken it to, there is a reaction there. We know something's happening. We're not really sure exactly what's happening, and we're not sure how to get it to happen on a continuous, predictable basis. But we know if we hit it with this hammer really, really hard, we get X out of it. So basically what they're doing with the cold fusion technology that we have available to us right now is they have figured out a way to, by brute force, get this thing to release a positive amount of energy. They haven't really figured out yet how to finesse it to where we can get, extraordinary amounts of energy. But, with some development, with some time, with some familiarity with the technology, this could be a significant game changer. Right now, we're able to get somewhere between 6 and 15 times as much energy out of the thing as we put in. Some scientists are speculating that once we really figure it out and get a handle on this thing, we might be able to get 25,000 times as much energy out as we put in. But that could be, 10, 20 years off. We just don't know. The idea is we take baby steps. We've just learned how to make fire. We haven't quite figured out how to make the Bessemer furnace yet, but damn if we aren't getting close.
I want that 25,000 to 1 ratio, Gary Hendershot.
Well, I tell you, even at 16 to 1, this could be a technology that would be very practical for boiling water, spinning that turbine, making that electricity, and it could, in theory, spin the same darn turbine that a nuclear plant spins today.
The tried and true method we've been doing for 100 years, spin a turbine around, make some electricity. That 100-year-old technology that, throughout my state, a lot of it's created by, we're talking about governments hindering technology here. But if we looked at the build-out of dams across the country, I mean, wasn't this is the kind of projects that made sense, where you had, government stepping up and electrifying a nation through the construction of all these dams coast to coast. So, I mean, there's examples of the usefulness of government projects as long as they're not dominated by special interests, or when the people are the special interest.
That's the key. And keep in mind, some of those hydroelectric plants, when were they constructed? During our last
depression,
big economic depression.
Yeah.
So, we're getting to a position right now where such public works may indeed make sense. Now, I'm not one of these guys who thinks big government can solve all of our problems. But the fact is, whether we want it or not, we've got big government right now. Right now, big government seems to be blocking us at every turn. Every time we decide, okay, I can't get a job. So instead of working for somebody else, maybe I'm a welder. Okay, I'm going to buy me a truck. I'm going to buy me a welding machine. I'm going to hang a shingle out in front of my place, and, I'm going to offer people my welding services independently. The government puts so damned many obstacles in front of you that trying to operate as a small business person, becomes difficult. So people are stymied. The government seems to, at every time we turn around, the government seems to be standing in our way.
Absolutely.
If we got this big government, at least get the hell out of our way and, grab hold of an oar and start rowing instead of, standing up in the boat and rocking it for us,
Well, again, you have to, and for the last 10 minutes, maybe we can get into this, because it's kind of, you and I talked during the break about, you think this is just going to drag on for, this slow spiral downward will just drag on for a decade or maybe 2 more decades. And we'll have a lot of people, falling by the wayside in that amount of time.
Now, keep in mind, I'm a little older than you, and from my perspective, it's already been collapsing since the 1980s. That's how long I have been predicting the crash. So I'm looking at it saying, they've already ridden this dying horse for 30 years. They could ride it for another 20. It seems like, every time this out of control locomotive rounds another corner, a few more people fly off the train, and I feel sorry for them. So far I've managed to hang on with both hands in my teeth. I mean, there's a lot of us, who are, holding on for dear life because, it's pretty obvious the train's out of control. When's the train actually going to, crash into the side of the mountain? I don't know.
Okay, well,
I don't think it's going to be anytime soon.
Well, let's look at that. Let's ask that question. When is a train? When's it coming off the rails? And if we look, and I put into the chat, you're probably watching it, that I don't agree. And I don't agree that this is going on for another decade or another 2 decades. I don't think it's going on for more than another year or 2 at the most, unless we live on a planet that doesn't even resemble the one we live on now, which I'm talking about, where we have sovereign nations, sovereign states, sovereign people, freedom of any form, because every bubble, and you talked about since the 80s, but if we took a look at from 2000, 2001 till now, and we look at the bubbles that have been created.
2000 was the tech crash. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Tech crash.
I remember the savings and loan crash. Okay.
Me too.
That happened during Bush the first reign.
Sure. The SNL scandals, which was a drop in the bucket compared to what we hear happening every day.
That got us prepped. That gave them their.
That gave the Federal Reserve. That gave the Federal Reserve the ability to start their zero interest rate policy. And it gave it cemented the formula in which we achieved success, which is giving an economy over to a central bank. And we did that. We had zero interest rate. We had bubble after bubble. The last bubble, the greatest bubble of all, is the sovereign debt bubble. Now, there's absolutely no conceivable way, not just from conspiratorial alternative media folks like myself, but even mainstream economists, that the sovereign debt bubble is going to continue for another decade. It's not going to happen. I mean, Europe right now, I mean, you talked about Greece. Greece is in depression. There's 5-6 countries inside of Europe that are in a full-blown mainstream media.
And Greece's sovereign debt is what percentage of GDP? About 120%?
About the same as ours.
Bingo!
Yeah.
I mean, how come we're not there?
Well, I think we are there. I think the only thing that is keeping it from being realized is we have the petrodollar, which is still still floating.
Yep.
And we have
And compared to everything else, the U.S. dollar smells pretty good. I mean, if you're well heeled, you got dough you want to stash someplace.
That's a fact.
You're obviously not going to stash it in Greek money, right? You're not going to stash it in Italian money, right? The euro is looking kind of, So where are you going to go? You go to the U.S. and you buy treasury bonds. I mean, I suspect that the treasury could charge you interest for the money that you put in bonds, and there would be those who would buy U.S. treasuries.
They are. If you buy, I mean, the 10-year, is what, 1.4%. It's at an all-time low. We're at a record low on it. So if you're buying that, inflation, even by government phony statistics, is 2%. You're paying money for the security.
Because it's not keeping up with inflation.
Right.
Any money that you put into that is not keeping up with inflation. Therefore, by definition, it is costing you. But, inflation is how they plan to get around this. We inflated our way out of the cost of the Vietnam War, and they will inflate their way out of the cost of the current wars. But, one thing you mentioned, I do take to heart. I mean, there is no way that what we see as a free people living in the United States of America, the Democratic Republic that we kind of thought we were taught
that we had,
the way things are supposed to be, there's no way that's going to continue. I mean, we are already deep into a fascist economic system.
Absolutely.
I believe that our government will become, shall we say, Sieg Heil.
I agree. And now, if it goes on 2 more decades,
we be good little Nazis. We do exactly what he is told. Otherwise, we don't last too long.
Wow, that's Gary Hendershot right there. That's a pretty good Colonel Clink impression you're rolling with.
I see nothing.
The Sergeant Schultz.
No, it's the God's honest truth. I mean,
then you're talking another complete generation. We already have a generation kill, right? If you're 12 years old, guess what? You've never lived in a nation, and you're an American. You've never lived in a nation that wasn't at war. So we're bringing up a whole generation of kids who see this nonstop projection of military power around the world. If we go another 10 years, 15, 20 years, you'll have not only this generation growing up in constant war, but the build out of the security industrial complex where they're not used to going anywhere without busting out a paper, busting out some kind of identification, submitting to some kind of naked body scanner, and it's all just normal at that point. But I don't see that.
It seems it's headed in that direction.
I think we are headed in that direction. But I think,
how do you turn it around?
That's a great question.
It's very difficult to do. I mean, there are some people out there who are actually standing up to it. I saw a video on YouTube the other day where this guy, after his third checkpoint, he looks at the guy and he says, "No, thank you. I'd like to just be on my way." I mean, did you see that video?
I did.
I mean, it was a great video. I mean, I have a great deal of admiration for that fellow because I understand his frustration. I mean, it just flat pisses you off. What do you mean I can't drive from here to my customer's place where I'm supposed to be there an hour ago and I'm stuck in traffic because of your darn checkpoints? Yeah, righteous indignation. There are not enough Americans today willing to confront them with righteous indignation over, interfering with our freedom to move about, our freedom to do business.
Right.
And so many of the population seem timid. What the hell happened to this country? When did it disappear? When did that righteous indignation over, intrusion into our lives, when did it go away? I don't know. It seemed to me like I took 20 years out of the battle to take time off to raise my kids. I was very active in the anti-war movement during the late 60s and 70s. I was out there getting pepper gassed and getting the shit kicked out of me constantly. Oops, to me. It was not a pleasant time, but when it seemed like we had won that war and it was over and done with, and it seemed like the country was back, on an even keel, I decided, hey, I've been fighting this battle for about 6 years. It's time for me to settle down, get a job, find a wife, have a couple of kids. It's my turn for a normal life,
Right.
And about the time my kids were going off to college, I finally poked my head back up to see how things were going on because I've been busy for 20 years, man. It's rough raising kids. Poked my nose up and my God, it's worse than I left it. I thought things were back on an even keel, and we're worse now than we were back in the 70s. This is worse than Nixon.
Absolutely. What Nixon did is peanuts.
The last 4 or 5 presidents we've had are starting to make Nixon look good.
The good old
Nixon,
days.
You were right. We love you, honest. We want you back. Please.
Good old days of Tricky Dick is what Gary Hendershot's nostalgic for. Gary Hendershot, thank you very much for co-hosting with me every Monday, first hour, 5 o'clock West Coast, 8 o'clock East Coast. If you want to hear more of the Smart Scarecrow, his programs every Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern on Justin TV. Just type in Smart Scarecrow Show, Gary.
Yeah, Smart Scarecrow Show. You'll find me. I'm easily found.
All right.
I don't even hide from my bill collectors.
All right, guys, stay tuned because in about 10 minutes we're going to have the one and only Ellen Brown on, and it's going to be a very informative hour. Hang tight. We'll see you in about 10 minutes.